Okay. Well, what we have for everyone today is just a bit of a slide deck that Sarah's going to walk us through that covers kind of the key items that we just need to discuss and get some closure on with you with this group. So thank you all in advance for your time and participation. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. It's very brief. It should only be about a 15-minute slide deck, and then we'll get into our discussion.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I will start by sharing the screen. Everyone is able to see that. All right. So as Linda said, thank you all for your continued participation in the Affordable Housing Working Group. We mentioned a few introductions from Sarah Latimer, met you all before, but with Department of Planning and Zoning. Mary, did you want to go around and do a round of introductions around the room?
I think everybody here knows each other.
Okay,
yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. So as we mentioned in our emails, we wanted to reconvene the group to discuss possible changes and additions to the finding and recommendations report, including adjustments to the proposed definition of affordable housing and recommendations for the affordable housing column or pool in the APRO allocation chart. So as you may recall, the Affordable Housing Working Group was tasked with several items as part of HOCO by Design, which included a definition of affordable and accessible housing and the evaluation of incentives such as housing allocation pool for affordable and/or accessible units, as you can see highlighted here. So we'll first jump into the definition of affordable and accessible housing. So you've all seen this slide before, but you might recall that the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, or the HOMP, completed in 2019, defines affordable housing in a few different ways, but generally refers to housing where occupants can live and still have enough money left over for other necessities. Specific to income, the Housing Opportunities Master Plan recommends that Howard County should prioritize housing that serves owner-occupied households making less than 120% of area median income, or AMI, and renter households making less than 60% of AMI. So looking at what that means for income, as in our previous discussions, many affordable housing programs are restricted to specific AMI bands. So in that extremely low income range, that would be under 30% AMI, or about $36,000 per year. In low income, or 30 to 60% AMI, that would be about $36,000 to $72,000 per year. And moderate income, which is our 60 to 120% AMI, would be $72,000 to $145,000 per year.
I'm sorry, are you adjusting for family size, or what are you doing about family size in that? Thanks.
So that definition is from the Housing Opportunity Master Plan, which, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that does adjust for family size.
It's for a family of 4, Peter, but we may want to say that.
Okay, that's helpful.
I'll look at the master plan. I'll look, but I think it's 5 for a family of 4, but I'll look.
That's a good question.
So looking at the current working group definition in the finding and recommendations report, we currently define affordable housing as market rate or income restricted housing that is affordable to those making 55 to 120% AMI for sale housing, or affordable housing to those making 50 to 100% of AMI for rental housing. And in January, the Housing Affordability Coalition proposed changes to the definition, suggesting that the definition of affordable housing in the report reference Howard County or local AMI rather than regional AMI, and that it defines rental housing as housing affordable to households between 0 to 60% AMI, or owner-occupied housing affordable to households at 60 to 120% AMI. So as you all saw, we requested feedback from the working group members on the proposed changes and received feedback from 10 different members. 7 of these.
I'm sorry, could you, I'll do this again, another technical thing perhaps, but if we're suggesting that you use Howard County, not the AMI, because AMI is area, you wouldn't say Howard County AMI.
I believe the coalition was suggesting that we use locally defined, so the Howard County area median income versus.
No, that would be the Howard County median income. It would not be the Howard County area median income. When you say the area median income, you're referring to the federal area, which is the metropolitan area. So I think we're either, again, I'm sorry, it's just technical, but we're either at the Howard County median or the area median.
It's
So
the Howard County.
AMI is essentially the trade definition for income whenever you're talking about affordable housing. You're right that it's area median income and not median income, but when you're talking about income, it's AMI. That's just
Everything else in the county refers to the county median. So if you look at the MIHU program, it's the Howard County median. It's not the Howard County area median.
publishers. So when they're talking about 60% of the AMI, they're talking about what HUD publishes and provides on an annual basis, and it's going to be the Howard County AMI. Same thing with Baltimore, like Baltimore City AMI, Baltimore County AMI. Sometimes they group it into like Baltimore Towson, yada yada yada, and then there's like the Montgomery County, DC, Northern Virginia AMI, but it's still AMI is how it's always referred to.
All right, well, I disagree with that, but it's as long as we understand what we're talking about, it doesn't really matter.
Peter, I believe we do distinguish between the regional, and we say Howard County, correct, Sarah, throughout the document where it's
Yes.
referencing Howard County. Great, thank you.
So looking at the feedback we received from the working group members, 7 members suggested we use, as you see the distinction here, Howard County income levels versus 3 suggesting we use the Baltimore Regional Metropolitan Statistical Area income levels. And then looking at the AMI bands, working group members felt that affordable housing should be defined as housing affordable to renters at 0 to 60% AMI or owners at 60 to 100% AMI as proposed by the Affordable Housing Coalition. So we'll pause here for discussion. Based on the proposed changes from the Affordable Housing Coalition, the findings from the HOMP, and the feedback received from working group members, what definition of affordable housing should be presented in the finding and recommendations report and used in the future affordable housing efforts? Should AMI bands refer to local/county income levels or regional metropolitan AMI? And what AMI bands should be targeted for rental or owner occupied units?
So before we get to that, I will say that if you go back to the slide, Sarah, that has the 30 to 60 and the 60 to 80 and the 80 to 120, the HOMP does state those percentages, but it doesn't give the numbers, the income levels. So when you say 36, 348 or less, 36 to 72, we do need to look and see what figures you used because the HOMP just specifically states the 30 to 60, 60 to 120. We need to look and see what you did. And if it was for a family of 4, we need to distinguish that.
Can definitely go back and clarify.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and these percentages, I mean, we could always we don't have to reference those specific incomes, the numbers, because that's just the assumption based on the AMI in 2019 for the county, which was 121, I believe, for a family of 4. So it was those ranges were established using that 121.
Understood.
Yeah.
We just, if we're going to say it's a number, we need to put that it's a family of 4. If we don't, that's fine.
Yep. Okay.
Yes, understood.
My first impression, I was just going to mention my first impression, 60% seems to make a lot of sense just because, $73,000 at the top end of the range is quite a bit. Any more would be kind of getting up there and beyond 60%. Also see 60% in other counties as a standard number. And then it seems to make sense just to stick with Howard County and not expand beyond that. That was my initial impression in terms of feedback.
And I know we presented this question to you a while ago via email. I know Jeff Delmonico sent it out because that was something that the Affordable Housing Coalition had asked that we had submit to you all. And so we're just recircling back. So we didn't hear from the entire group, number 1. And number 2, since we needed to meet again, we just thought we would now go ahead and have a discussion. So that's why we're back.
I'd like to comment on the area designation for the income limits. And I'm not sure if this is where Peter's going, but my primary concern is just confusion when it comes to compliance and implementation. So in the event that a community has another affordable financing program, it will use the federal Baltimore MSA. And so this creates a lot of confusion if you're qualifying people. And that has remained a commentary of mine for a long time. And I think, Kelly, you've heard me say this with some of the stuff with bridges. I just, from a compliance perspective, when you're dealing with multiple types of ways to calculate incomes, it creates a compliance problem. And the standard for affordable housing finance would be to use the HUD designation of the area median income, which would be the Baltimore MSA.
Right. And to dovetail onto that, I mean, when you're talking about affordable rental housing, there may be a few developments out there that aren't using LIHTC, but the majority of them will be using the low-income housing tax credit program, which does use the metropolitan statistical areas for it, which does allow for income averaging and does allow 80% units to be within a rental housing development as well. So I just want to make sure that you're not causing a conflict, as Jessica was describing, from a compliance standpoint, but also from a overall financing standpoint when you're trying to put these deals together and you're using predominantly those resources to know that what you're proposing here may work within a particular development, but it may not.
Yeah. So let me add a little clarification, and I really want to go around the virtual room to get some feedback on this. So I think if we could qualify this, I think what we're trying to get at is what should the definition be for the affordable housing set aside column. So remember, so in that house, so we're right now trying to get to this affordable housing set aside column in the actual housing allocation chart. What should the criteria be, the qualifying criteria be for us to pull units from that column? And that's where I think, right, if there's, so there can still be those LIHTC deals moving forward and potentially pooling allocations from those columns, right? So we're not trying to get people to change their criteria for those federal dollars. You'll still have to comply with whatever those regulations are. I think we're just trying to hone in on what we want the definition to be for that set aside column. What type of unit qualifies for those affordable housing set aside allocations? And maybe, I don't know if it would be helpful to get into the rest of the presentation so you can better understand how those set aside and how we allocate housing units.
So Mary, this is Jackie. Just to kind of echo what Jessica and Ned is saying, I think, and Justin, I think in terms of aligning as much as possible with standard practice and definition of affordability makes sense, right? And so you're looking at affordability, low income, I put low income in quotes because up to $72,000 is just, working class. That is what is, defined as affordable, and looking at homeownership opportunities above 60 to 120% of AMI makes sense, right? Those are the buckets and the pockets that we're accustomed to, and again, makes sense. I think, as we think about the buckets that you want, there does have to be clarity because there are overlapping AMI calculations. So there's this understanding that those are the parameters in which, you're asking developers to work within can be complicated. So as long as you understand the policy, but the effects of policy and implementation is very important in this puzzle. Right. Mm-hmm. So how we define the AMI using the regional Baltimore regional MSA is how typically has been defined. And even in other localities that have used inclusionary zoning, they've tied it to HUD standards and how AMIs are calculated. So, but I think the buckets in terms of defining, what we're targeting in terms of affordability for rental up to 60% of AMI, for homeownership between 60 and 120% of AMI makes sense. Also understanding that homeownership opportunities at the 60% level are very difficult. And just making ourselves aware of that, right? That's important. That is a lower income. That's still someone who is within that rental mix that, we have to really look at how much affordable homeownership opportunities are put into that bucket in, at that lower tier on the homeownership side. But I do think I agree with the recommendations that the coalition has raised. And, I think we need to, think about the implementation as it relates to income.
What is the Baltimore AMI right now? family.
It's pretty close to what that 2019 Howard County was, but I would imagine Howard County is significantly higher now.
Yeah, it's 141 in Howard now.
Right. So I think the Baltimore last one was right around 121 or something like that. I don't know what it is currently.
That sounds right, Ned.
So for a developer who's doing something non-LIHTC and hoping to claim allocations from the 340 that are available every year, and if they had to use the Baltimore AMI, their qualifying income would be considerably lower, right? 20% lower? 60% of 120 versus 60% of 140, right? So we're making it harder for his deal to pencil. He's not doing LIHTC, he's trying to conform to whatever the requirements are. He thought that all he had to do was MIHU, which is based on the county household income, which is 141. But this discussion would take us a step down in qualifying income. Is that what we want?
I would say no. I would just say what we just don't want is confusion and difficulty in clarifying what is affordable and what isn't. And you're right, for the most part, probably Howard County's income, we will fit under that, even maybe at 80%, even with our mixed income deals that still have income averaging. But I don't know if that works in perpetuity. I mean, things change, right?
Yeah, I'm not advocating more confusion, but I think that we don't have a big risk of confusion. Howard County, for as long as I've been following this, the AMI has been substantially above Baltimore. I expect that will continue for some time. And when it doesn't, we can revisit. Because there'll be bigger problems then.
Okay. Let's see, we've heard from, I think we heard, anybody else want to weigh in on this? Heard from Ned, I think. Ned, your hand's still up. Did you have more you wanted to?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I was having trouble getting in, so I tried to be polite, which is usually not me.
I appreciate that. That helps us facilitate the conversation. Let's see. Grace, did you have anything you wanted to add? I'm just going to call on people's names if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I know, Jackie, we just heard from you. Jessica, we heard from you. Justin, we heard from you. Paul, we heard from you. Peter, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we kind of try to?
I mean, I agree with the 60%. I think I would probably go with the statistical area again for simplicity. And I think to Paul's point, it would leave out some properties that are trying to get those, in between, somebody trying to pencil out. I haven't seen things like that. It doesn't mean people wouldn't try to do it, but there just hasn't been much like that. So I don't know how much we'd be losing, but there is a risk of losing something there. That's right. But then the only other technical thing, again, I would mention is I think you need to make sure it's, as you do this, it's adjusted for family size throughout.
Okay. And then how about Thomas? Did you have anything you wanted to add? Or Tim? Tom,
no, I agree with what Peter. I agree with what Peter said, and I know that there was the sentiment that 60% would be very difficult to get with homeownership. Usually, you see it because of that at 80 to 120. I mean, you can leave it at 60, but just knowing that you're probably not, it would be very difficult to get somebody at that income and have it be affordable.
And then Thomas, it looks like you may have taken yourself off mute. Is your audio working out okay? Let's see. Thomas, if you're having any audio issues, please feel free to put a comment in the chat box if you'd like. Okay, so it sounds like there's agreement amongst the ranges, but not quite with regards to which median income type we should be using, be it local, be it regional, be it other. I'm hearing a large support for using the Baltimore Metropolitan AMI, but still some discussion around using the Howard County AMI, similar to how we qualify units for the MIHU. Before we make a decision on that, why don't we go through the next set of slides that talk a little bit how we allocate, oh, no comment, thanks, Thomas. How we allocate the housing allocations, just to keep that in your mind, because we do want to come to a recommended definition for what types of units should qualify for this affordable housing set aside, which is specific to the Howard County APO. All right, Sarah, I'm going to turn it back to you.
We'll jump right back in, and hopefully these slides will go quickly. I think they're familiar to most of you. So the next section will provide a quick reminder on Howard County's adequate public facilities ordinance overall. As Mary mentioned, the APO regulations control the pace of residential development, aim to ensure adequacy of school and road capacity, and this section will also be focused on the definition of affordable housing that we just discussed and how it relates to the affordable housing allocation pool included in HOCO by Design's allocation chart. So, as you know, there are 3 tests associated with APO. Before new development can proceed in the county, they need to pass each of these tests. So there's the allocations test, or the allocation of housing units. This test helps pace residential growth by broad geographic areas of the county, which are defined in the general plan. There's the schools test, where if a school is overcrowded in the area where a project is to be built, then that project is put on hold until the capacity for the new school is available, or improved school. And the third test is the roads test, and that test doesn't stop growth, but requires developer to do a transportation study and mitigate any road impacts. So for example, a developer might have to build a turn lane to mitigate impacts. The allocations test is conducted at the beginning of the development or subdivision process. And if no allocations are available, then the project is placed on hold until they are available in the next year. If allocations are available and the project passes all other tests, it typically takes about 3 years to get through the development review process and for units to actually be built on the ground. And the schools test is conducted once a project receives allocations. So if the schools are not open in a given location, the development project can be held for up to 4 years. So an allocation is a housing unit. So it's a 1-for-1. One dwelling unit is one allocation, no matter the housing type. The intent of the allocations is to pace development so that the county government can plan and provide for community facilities. Each year, the county council, typically in July, adopts a new allocation pool and school capacity chart, as mentioned previously. The allocation chart is based on growth projections in the general plan. Allocations are given out by geographic or other specialty pools, which we'll get into. There's also some exemptions that we'll talk about in another slide. So this chart is what's in the latest general plan, HOCO by Design, and the current geographic regions are downtown Columbia in red, activity centers, which are places targeted for mixed-use redevelopment in the plan, the rural west in green, and the rest of the county in the east is the other character areas in blue. And then the new pool set in red here is the affordable housing set-aside pool. So one of the tasks of the work group is to come up with a way to utilize the affordable housing allocations to incentivize affordable housing to take advantage of those 340 units per year in the pool. You can see this map from HOCO by Design lines up with the colors in that chart. So you can see the red is downtown Columbia here, the rural west, everything west of the PSA is that light green, our neon green is our activity centers, and the blue is other character areas. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some exemptions in the APO law. In the rural west, if you want to build a single lot in addition to your current lot by subdividing your lot in half and building another house, for example, there's an exemption from the allocations and the schools test. If you want to build a single lot for a family member or for financial hardship, there's an exemption from the allocation and the schools test. If a mobile home park is converted to apartment units, they aren't subject to APO, so it's a 1-for-1 replacement, meaning you basically get a unit credit for the number of units that were removed. Similarly, it's the same for redevelopment. And then there's no school capacity test for age-restricted units since they do not generate school children. However, MIHUs do not need allocations, but they still must pass the school capacity test. And there's a special affordable housing opportunities exemption that was recently passed by County Council, which exempts certain types of affordable units from allocations and schools tests. Looking specifically at the special affordable housing opportunities, per county code, these opportunities must meet the following criteria. So they need to be at least 40% of the units must be affordable to households earning 60% or less of the metropolitan statistical area median income, so not the county. The project must be led or in partnership with a local nonprofit or the Housing Commission. The project must be seeking or have received LIHTC or other state or federal financial assistance. And the County Council and County Executive have approved either a payment in lieu of taxes or pilot, or the council has adopted a resolution authorizing the project to proceed. So to be considered for a council resolution, the developer applies and then county staff run analyses to see what impact it would have to housing and schools, which is presented to the county council. Then the county council can make the decision if they want to exempt the project or units from APO allocations and schools tests. So far, there have been 4 projects that have received the exemption that were in school districts that were closed. They didn't have to pass the APO tests. The trade-off is obviously the county does not want to overcredit schools, but there's also the need for affordable housing. So looking at this chart for moderate income housing units, there were 888 MIHUs either approved for development or plans in process. As mentioned previously, MIHUs do not need allocations, but they do need to take the school capacity test. So due to many of our school districts being closed, many of these units do end up in a school waiting bin until their school capacity. Additionally, MIHUs are part of a larger development, so often they're part of a townhome development or apartment or multifamily development project. So in sum, APO has worked to slow growth in areas with high development activity, and the intent is to allow new infrastructure to be built and paid for in a known 10-year growth pace. It allows for capital budgeting to be planned by knowing the pace of growth, and it helps the school system to prepare. The trade-off is that APO does manage growth, but it's a limiting factor when you have high housing demand. So looking specifically at the findings and recommendations report from the working group, the task today is to recommend goals and criteria for the affordable housing set-aside column in the APO housing allocations chart. Specific to this topic, in the working group's report, it was recommended that development and process incentives be applied to this column, potentially in tandem with the zoning overlay. And it was also suggested that affordable and accessible units be exempt from APO testing requirements. So we brought the working group back together to confirm your recommendation on how affordable units that pull from this column should be defined and clarify your recommended zoning, process, and development incentives. These are the working group's recommendations that seem most applicable to the affordable housing set aside in the APO housing allocation chart. So they include number 1, implement density bonuses, expedited review processes, or other incentives for MIHU percentages beyond the required amount. Number 2, develop a floating zone whereby increased density and other incentives are provided by right for projects providing affordable housing, given certain criteria are met in the development proposal. Number 3, adjust the timing of the APO waiting bins. Number 4, exempt affordable housing, accessible housing, and minor subdivisions from APO testing requirements. Number 5, adjust school capacity requirements to revert back to the 2018 adequacy standards. Number 6, for incentives to developers such as reduced permitting and development fees or no APO requirements. And number 7, provide incentives throughout the county rather than in targeted locations to avoid concentration of and encourage affordable housing. So based on these recommendations, let's discuss the following. How does the affordable housing definition that we just discussed apply to the column? So providing affordable units with zoning incentives or a floating zone that increase the density and number of housing types allowed in exchange for more affordable housing, incentivizing missing middle unit types by allowing them to pull from the affordable housing allocation pool, and how projects with a certain threshold of affordable units beyond the amount required could utilize the pool and be exempt from APO schools test. This could include units beyond the required amount for the below programs, including MIHU, LAHU, and DIHU units, LIHTC units, projects that qualify under the Governor's Housing Bill, projects funded by the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund, and others that meet the definition of affordable and accessible housing as we discussed earlier.
Yeah. So now we're ready to discuss. Does anybody have any questions about how this column kind of works within our development, our plan review process? So we'll get a plan and we first have to test it to make sure we have allocations available, first and foremost, in one of those geographic areas that Sarah showed on that map. But if they're offering up units that can meet this criteria or this definition that we set out for this affordable housing column, then they could pull from that column as well at the time of the first stage of site plan review. So, and the idea is that what we wanted this group to do is to help us think through how do we incentivize a project, a developer, to want to pull from this column so that we can actually realize and achieve these units. So MIHU is exempt. They don't have to pull housing allocations, but the rest of the units that are in that development project do have to pull housing allocations. So for example, one of the questions here is, should projects offering to go above and beyond the county's MIHU requirements be allowed to pull from this column? Is that a way to get more affordable housing?
I've got a technical question for Jeff.
Right.
So if I've got a project in a mixed income project in a character area where schools are closed, and I submit a plan and it goes through the initial part of the process, it stops at sketch plan because my schools are closed. But if I could get an allocation in this affordable column, would I? And if so, would that allow me to take and fail the school tests sooner and faster?
Right. I think, Paul, that's one of the recommendations. So right now the way it works is the first test is the allocations test. So if you're a project in a mixed unit area that has 10% mixed income units, it gets its allocations like any other project, and it needs an allocation for every single unit, no matter what the income type is. And then it takes the schools test. And then if it fails the schools test, the whole thing can't go forward.
Right.
Until it passes the schools test.
But
so I think what you described was one of the provisions of this column could be that if that project were to get allocations from this column, then maybe any project that takes allocations from this column wouldn't have to take the schools test.
Yes, that's exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I think that might be. Is that sort of what you were saying?
I was hoping that could be the case, because that would be a substantial incentive to meet this higher requirement for affordable. Yes.
Right. And the key is the higher, because right now, under the current zoning, there's an MIHU requirement for projects in most all zones in Howard County, like 10 or 15%. Right now, those MIHU units are exempt from meeting allocations. But they're still held up from the schools test. So basically, if a project were to provide over and above what the zoning currently requires, then perhaps the recommendation could be that the whole project doesn't have to take the schools test, including the market rate portions of the units in that project. Because the reality is, for the schools test, either completely passes or it doesn't pass. For an apartment building, you can't have some units pass and not the other units pass the schools test, because the whole building needs to be built at once.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I was also had a secondary concern that I could be issued allocations from this column just for the affordable units, except that MIHUs are exempt from requiring it. And so I could wind up in a catch-22. So I would much prefer that they all be awarded from this column and that it be linked to a green light on the school test.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a potential recommendation, because in Hookup by Design, it's asking for these recommendations of how to use these columns, right? How to use this particular column.
I think we've got a, apple was a bit of a stick, and this column is a carrot.
So were you suggesting that one of the recommendations could be that if a project comes through and they propose to go some amount above and beyond the MIHU requirements, that one, the units above and beyond the MIHU requirements could pull from this column, and there could be some sort of exemption from the schools test, or the entire project would pull from this column, which, we don't, I mean, this column, I think, was from just this person who helped with the Hookup by Design piece. I think this column was intended to just be for those affordable units.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Reality.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It'll be difficult for us to find 5,000 spots of affordable housing in the next 12 years.
Yeah.
So I'd much sooner front load it and do 340 a year until they run out. Just me talking.
Well, I think this goes back to our earlier definition as well, is, the definition of affordable housing. I mean, you can have an affordable housing development that is a mixed income development that has significant market rate components in it, but it's still, those market rate components are used to cross subsidize and create affordability across the entire development. So you want the whole development to move forward and take advantage, because that's what's delivering the major affordable components of that development. So somehow, the exemption that's already out there right now, contemplates that by using LIHTC criteria of 40 at 60 and things like that. Should some of that also be introduced to the affordable definition as well, so that a true mixed income affordable development can move forward and take advantage of this?
I would even add an invitation to be creative. I know that's not how rules are written, but as you know, Ned, better than me, putting these projects together, is more complicated than any of us could ever think of. And if you could come back to us with a better solution, if you looked at the rules and said, hey, I can give you what you're looking for, but I can do it differently, I think there ought to be room for that somehow.
Can we do that without a zoning adjustment? Like, I don't know if this could be the mechanism without zoning to move that forward. So, and I'm not sure when we would be doing comp rezoning to make this really happen. That's my one concern with that. So I think it can be a recommendation, but I don't want this to be the mechanism to do it without comp rezoning. That's my only concern.
I agree with you. I don't want to go back to the zoning board for anything else either. I would sooner go to Kelly's board the way we do now for a few other items, and let Ned make the pitch to Kelly's board that I can meet your requirements, but not quite in the way that they're written, but I think you'll be happy with the result, and see if the board agrees.
And Paul, in order to do a mixed income project that is over and above the already required MIHU requirements in the zoning, like 10%, it seems like for that to happen, there would need to be some kind of incentive in terms of like a density bonus, because you would need the additional market rate units perhaps to add the additional does that make sense? So
Yeah.
which would be like a zoning thing anyways, right? Like yeah.
I think that the way we're going to get there is to add more carrots. And so getting through the schools test, getting a density bonus, you know, being able to pitch to Kelly's board, all of those things make this less daunting. It's already hard enough, but it makes it less daunting.
Do you think that if the only carrot was you don't have to pass the schools test, that would be an incentive enough where a developer would maybe build 15% MI2s rather than 10%?
A few years ago, I would have said sure, because interest rates were so low.
Mm-hmm.
Now you see full-on market rate buildings not coming out of the ground because interest rates are too high.
Right.
I think the answer is we need more carrot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed interest rates won't be high forever.
They'll be higher than they were, I think, is the answer. They're not going to be 3% again. You know, it'll be 5%. And 5%, you know, still makes you work really hard to make it work. You can't make it work at 7 or prime plus any number right now. It just doesn't work. I mean, prime plus any number now is close to 9%. You can't make that work. So we've got to tempt people to be bolder, be innovative, answer the call.
Yeah. So, Paul, can you clarify one thing? What types of projects were you suggesting? How did Kelly's board that you mentioned, how did you see that playing a role with this affordable housing set aside column?
Well, right now, Kelly's board considers alternative compliance applications. And this could be something like an alternative compliance that would say, and I think there's even room in the alternative compliance language for a developer to propose something unique and probably suitable. That's kind of what I'm thinking about.
That's true. That's true. And also the housing board considers pilots, and yeah, so they consider both those items already.
Again, with the pilot still is, you're a step before the zoning board or the council. I want you to be the end of the line for this. I want them to be able to persuade your board that this mixed income project with this mix of incomes at these levels of affordability, plus this level of increased density, makes overall sense for what the county is looking for.
Understood.
Just for the record, can we just get the name of the board? I am taking notes here. So I just wanted to get the official name.
Housing and Community Development Board.
Okay, thank you.
And they're a qualified group of people who understand housing. They've got staff available through Kelly, so they're not just an advisory board. They're capable people at this.
So, Paul, if I understand correctly, so that means for any project coming through the door that would want to pull allocations from this affordable housing column, because perhaps this affordable housing column, your recommendation would be for it to be exempt from the APFO schools test. They have to pitch their project to the housing board so that the housing board weighs in and says, yes, we think that this qualifies as an affordable housing project, and these units that you're proposing to go above and beyond the minimum requirements qualify for this column.
Yes, I might even add a lowercase solution, in that if it doesn't qualify for the school exemption and it doesn't qualify for increased density, it might simply qualify for getting some of its allocations from this column. That used to be a problem. I don't anticipate it will be in the future, but who knows? That's just a minor secondary consideration.
Okay.
Well, again, I just go back to you brought up the other fact is, we can't have half a project approved though, so it's got to include all components of the development to be able to move forward, not just what comes out of this column.
Right. That caveat will be included.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about smaller projects? Or, you know, a piece of this column is about a lot of the projects you're talking about tend to be, you know, mixed income rental, multifamily. But what about the for purchase side of this? I know there was a lot of interest when this column was developed that we want to see more affordable units for sale being produced.
Difficult.
Yes.
So
it's really, really difficult.
Yeah,
there's no subsidy on that side for the most part. So that's really what prevents it, because, you know, to create affordable home ownership, I mean, you know, people aren't building market rate home ownership to make it work. So imagine, you know, having a price point half of that and still the costs being the same.
And small means the denominator is also small. So you know, if the community is only 10 units in size and you want 4 to be affordable, the other 6 just cannot pay enough money to make it work.
Even if all 10 of them were exempt from, even if their process was expedited, because they would be exempt from, if the whole project were exempt, say, from the schools test, even that 10 unit development, the number still wouldn't fly.
The ground costs $40,000, $400,000.
Yeah.
So right out of the ground, you're not affordable. You put a $300,000, you know, sticks and bricks on it, you're at $700,000, and that's not affordable. So I don't want to be a naysayer, but it's really, really hard.
So just to ask a clarifying question. So if, again, in that same example that Paul mentioned, 10 units, 10 homes are being built. If those projects, if that project is receiving some housing opportunity trust fund or another subsidy to offset and create some greater affordability, is that factored into, is that already exempt from this pool? I just want to be clear.
Well, not yet, but that's not a bad way to think, Jackie.
So I think that's how you leverage it, right? If you're going to create affordability in homeownership, then it needs subsidy. Then it should be, you know, for those projects that do receive subsidy, whether it's from Howard County's Housing Opportunity Trust Fund or another state funding source, that we can access the affordable housing pool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more sort of programs you could add to it, the better.
Yes.
And then it sort of makes sense also, then any project pulling from this fund could be exempt from needing to take the schools test as the further parent.
That would help a lot.
Yeah, you know what I mean? As far as because there's really, as we know, and we've shown before, I think, to this group and also to the APFO review committee, there's not really an issue in terms of the need for more allocations, because the number of allocations in the other part of this chart, which isn't being shown, that you're not seeing, I don't know if you recall it from the past, we have more allocations available than are being utilized now. So utilizing this column just by itself really isn't so much of an incentive. It used to be, but not any longer, because growth is slowing and the number of allocations in HOCO by design is at a high level, higher than we're achieving. So tying something like exemption from the school test would be important, I think, to make it work. The APFO review committee, they met last Wednesday night, and somebody raised this question about the allocations. They said, are allocations supposed to be a limiting factor, or are they an aspirational number? Because people are beginning to recognize that under the current general plan, we're not achieving what's in the allocation chart, which is a reverse of the way it used to be back in the 90s, where the intention of the allocation chart was to limit the number of units per year because we were experiencing too much and the infrastructure wasn't keeping up. So we're sort of in this incentive era now. So there has to be more of an incentive than just allowing affordable units, however defined, to pull from this chart. It's got to be something additional, I think, like the schools test exemption.
I agree. And I like your idea, Jeff, of broadening it, like Jackie's idea, to ownership, so that they have something to work with. You know, they've got some density to work with, a density bonus to work with. They've got some help from, say, the trust fund or from home or something, and they can put something together. That makes it easier, but it's still really, really hard. But
right. Yeah.
Pull them out.
Kelly, I had a quick question. So when we were talking about affordable or for sale housing affordability, I know that current MISU program for SFA units, townhomes, you generally require, or maybe it has to be required, that 10% of the townhomes, for example, have to be moderate income housing. Is that problematic for small townhome projects, or does it only work for larger townhome projects, as Paul was alluding to? Maybe Kelly wasn't on the phone. Maybe Kelly's not with us any longer.
Well, Jeff, as you know, MIHU rounds up. So to get one MIHU, you have to have at least 10 in your project.
Right.
There just aren't many 10-unit townhouse projects. So the norm is 50. So
Got it.
5 MIHUs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that a church group could come along and say, we want to put 15 townhomes on our parking lot. And then you might get 2 MIHUs from that.
Right.
And maybe some incentive for them would qualify for the column that we're talking about.
Uh-huh.
And Paul, that could happen under the Housing Expansion Affordability Act. I mean, I know nonprofits can apply for projects under that state legislation and be eligible. I think for, I guess, I don't know if the density bonus is only in TODs or it would also apply to the nonprofit project, but.
It applies to the nonprofit. They get missing middle housing types in the single family districts, and then the same type of provisions as the TOD 30% and multifamily districts, and then can do mixed use and commercial and industrial districts as long as they're owned and controlled by a nonprofit. And then they have to do 25% MIHU for 40-year deed restriction. So it's the same provision, just the increased time, or the same time amount, just the increased MIHU provision.
Are we still waiting for the state to produce some regulatory guidance on those state programs?
Nope, we have it and we're implementing it. We just have not had any projects come forward yet for Howard County. Okay. And we are implementing it by policy since it preempts local land use authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
But you still have your APFO lever on it regardless. So that
we
wasn't
still have APFO lever. So basically for TOD, all the schools are closed except for the St. Denis, which is on the it's at the Baltimore County Mark Station. So northeastern Howard County is the only open area. And then pretty much all of the eastern Howard County PSA areas are pretty much closed school districts. So there's limited applicability there. And outside the PSA, there is some applicability, and that would be mostly the missing middle housing types because they're not on water and sewer.
Yeah, so this column having the school exemption would help those projects as well.
And then the third bullet point from the bottom one of the recommendations is utilizing this column for those projects that qualify under the Housing Expansion Affordability Act. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing that you recommend there would be some sort of application for projects that would want to pull from this column, describe how the project meets that definition of affordable housing, which we just discussed, which I'll revisit in a minute. and how they're going above and beyond the existing affordable housing requirements, namely in this case, MIHU. But there could be other ones that apply. And then that application goes to Kelly's board. And I know there's a name. What was the name again? Just notice Kelly's board.
DHCD.
DHCD.
I think it's DHCD board.
Yeah, the Housing and Community Development Board. Okay. That they evaluate and determine whether or not it meets they help evaluate whether or not the project is going above and beyond the MIHU requirements and meets the criteria of this column. And then once you get, if you can pull allocations from this column, the recommendation is that the incentive is that you're exempt from the schools APTO test.
And the only word I would change or modify in what you just said was you said that they would evaluate. And if I were on the board, I'd negotiate. So the Ned comes in and proposes, 200 units with a full spread of affordable ranges and incomes and rents, and in exchange for a density of X percent. And I might think that we can do slightly better and offer, ask him to come back with something slightly better.
Before we move on.
Well, I'm sorry, Paul, you're suggesting that this not be by right, then, that it's somehow there's a body or a political entity that decides? Because I think if it's not by right, you're going to have more trouble with it.
I'm trying to avoid going to the county council and the zoning board for a zoning decision on each and every project. So I'm trying to make it administrative.
So why wouldn't the body just decide whether or not it meets the requirements? The requirements are set, and then the body just says yes or no, it meets it. Yeah, and all I'm adding to that is, if I'm on the board, I might be a little greedy and ask for more. See if I can get it. But then it's back to not by right. No, I mean, just if I can get it. But if that's a problem for you, Peter, I'll withdraw it. I mean, I don't want to mess it up.
Peter, being a good businessman, is wanting to remove the uncertainty from the equation.
That's what I think we'll get the best results if we remove the uncertainty to the extent possible. I do agree with Paul. If I were sitting on that board, I might want that ability to sort of ratchet a little more out, but I tend to think we want it to be certain. I have a question for Mary, where you think this is going. Is this an exemption only for the affordable units, or the exemption apply to any project that had met some affordability requirement for all the units in the project?
For the schools test, so we were discussing that you can't really exempt just a unit from the schools test because the whole project takes the test. You can't build part of the project.
No, I'm sorry, I meant the extra allocations here. The units that would get this allocation versus the other allocations.
So say, for example, you have I'm going to use 10 because that's an easy number to work with. Say you have a 10 unit development, and 5 of those units are going to go above and beyond the MIHU requirements, and they're going to produce affordable units, and those 5 units will be pulled from the affordable housing column. So that whole 10 unit project, if you're pulling any unit from the affordable housing column, that whole project, I'm hearing the recommendation is that would be exempt from the APTO schools test. That's what I was hearing was the recommendation.
I understand that, and I think that's okay. I was just trying to make sure that it's only the affordable units that end up out of this allocation. The other units would have to be in the regular allocation. So if there were a shortage somehow there, you still couldn't go forward.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm almost wondering if all of the units could come out of this column. I know that the column is intended to be for affordable units, but I guess the question is, will there be, even if there's mixed use projects, if all the units can come out of this column, including the market rate in mixed income projects, is there really going to be more than 340 per year? Probably not.
Probably not.
Right?
You
So it
could-
seems like it would be simplified if any mixed income project that goes above the current zoning requirements is built in the county, then it could take from this column and it would be exempt from the schools test.
I would now advocate for that, because that means if you've got a 10% requirement, they build one extra unit, they get the whole thing in here.
Right.
But maybe if it's, I was
I
thinking.
think there should be a threshold.
There should be a threshold, yeah. I mean, yeah.
There should be a threshold of, it shouldn't be, one unit over the 10% gets you all the stuff here. It should be, a real mission driven development to create significant affordability, even if it has a market component.
Yeah.
The coalition is talking about 20%. Hit 20% and you're exempt from the school thing. You get a density bonus to offset, and a date with Kelly's board.
So Paul, actually, if I could offer 15%, and the reason I say that is because that's where the governor's housing package is with the TOD is 15%. For the TOD, it's 25% for the owned and controlled, the nonprofit. But Jeff, back to your question about the affordable housing, we have a lot in all of the columns. I think we have up to 1,600 units per year. So I guess my one fear would be is just because of the governor's housing package with offering so much incentive to build affordable units, I would hate for this column to get really used up by that when we also do have a lot of the character areas where we can really pull from. And, depending on where APFO goes, if the APFO committee and then council end up reverting back to our 2018 standards, let's just say, or they loosen up or, lower the or increase the adequacy threshold so more schools open up, we could be maybe going through some of the other columns. We might need those, right? We may start to use things up more quickly. So we don't want to burn through this faster than we need to. So I think I would suggest maybe a recommendation is to just use that for the affordable for purchase and for rental, because we have so much in the other columns that we can pull from.
Right. I completely understand that. And I agree with it. I guess what I was coming from was trying to avoid the confusion of, you mean is it only the units from this column that are exempt from the schools test, or all of them? Because people trying to wrap their head around that. But I completely agree with you. We have plenty of allocations in the other areas. So it would just people have to deal with the fact that it's the whole project that's exempt, not just this column, because you can't move forward with half a building, right? So, yeah.
Right. Jeff, you just want your math to be easy. I know.
Yeah, that's another part of it, right?
It's for Jeff's accounting purposes. I gotcha.
Right.
But if I were trying to package all of that, it would be that the whole project is exempt from the schools test. The affordable units come out of this column, the other units come out of the rest of the allocations, at least until we think the other allocations are going to be inadequate. But that the exemption from the schools test for the whole project only kick in at a threshold value of affordability. And what that number is sort of, I would think, under debate. I think some MIHUs are already at 15%, unless I'm wrong. So
correct.
I
You're
could
right.
be wrong.
That was our prevailing thought too, as well. Maybe like in the TOD boundary that the state has prescribed already, make that particular boundary exempt from the schools testing, let's just say. So no, I think that was some of the thoughts that we've been discussing. So I just wanted to reaffirm that. Yep.
Okay, so then I'm thinking, to get that exemption, I like the idea of the exemption in the areas that the state is emphasizing, but then, for other areas, maybe it's the HAC 20%. I could argue for it to be higher, but I think anything would be good there. So, but I wouldn't want it to be just like one unit or a minimal number.
No, it's got to be meaningful.
So were you recommending that the meaningful percentage could be a minimum of 20% affordability?
Where I,
Or did you not want to give a threshold quite yet?
I would go higher, but it's a group decision. I don't think that could be, I would probably go a little higher, but I don't know what the rest of the group thinks.
Do you mind?
I guess the only concern is obviously at a lower threshold number, and deals are already getting done in, well, shouldn't say that, but would already get done if they weren't for other issues and NEFO and stuff like that out there. But the cost of doing business has already been kind of absorbed in most developments in Howard County at that 10 to 15% range, and they're not necessarily altruistic in doing that. So that's just trying to make sure that it's really for true affordable developments and not just a workaround for a true market rate development.
yeah, you're right. That's the goal.
Yeah. I was going to do you mind if we just try to go around the virtual room? I could just ask people if they have any thoughts on the topic. Okay, I'm just going to go in the list. Linda, I saw you just had your hand up. Was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just again, so the state is offering, so the own and control, the nonprofit own and control is 25%. So just offering that up is that's the threshold for 40 years. So if you want to take the TOD is 15, own and control is 25, just so you have that benchmark of percentages.
So I'm sorry, under the governor's housing package, if there is a
Correct.
nonprofit coming in, they have to meet a minimum of a 25% affordability requirement?
Correct.
Okay, but if a private developer is doing a project in a TOD zoning district, then their
15.
affordability is only 15. Okay. Okay. So let me just go around the room if you don't mind. And if you don't have a comment, that's fine. I just want to make sure everyone has the chance to share their thoughts on the topic and what the recommendation is. So Grace, you're at the top of my list. Grace, did you have any?
I think just talking and hearing what everyone's saying, I think that consistency issue is probably best so that there's not so much confusion. I know from years with Paul that, understanding what's expected and having those expectations not be all over the place is most profitable for the developers and makes the most sense for getting projects done. So I think just being consistent with, these numbers that we're talking about, whether we're going to stick with what the state is doing with their programs or stick with the 20%.
Okay. Jackie?
So I do think that there should be meaningful percentage of affordable units in order to be exempt. I do just have a clarifying question in terms of, and this is my ignorance of how many TOD sites are in Howard County? And whether or not that 15% is 5?
5, and 4 are closed and 1 is open. And it's 3/4 of a mile from the boundary of the TODs that is the qualified geography of the project area.
And Linda, when you said closed, what does that mean? Can you explain that a
Means
little
that
bit more?
I'm sorry, I apologize. So meaning that those schools are not open to new development, meaning that they are inadequate to receive new development. They're above the 115%, 105% for elementary and middle school. None of our high schools are closed.
Okay.
To new development. Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying. So I do think, having some alignment with the state, but also realizing that 15 may not be applicable in some of our other areas within the county. And so, I'm comfortable with what Peter had suggested at 20%. But again, I think you're right. It's the devil's in the detail between 15 and 25% sounds reasonable. I think, looking at the projects and HCD having the real look at these projects, I think gives and having an administrative approval based on what Paul was saying and the recommendations, I think is the right approach.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Let's see, I'm just going to keep going in line, so get ready. I'm going to call your name. Jessica.
Hi. I just want to echo the sentiment that I keep hearing about predictability. I think it's not just wanting the predictability or it being profitable. I think developers are also not even willing to take the risk to start a project if they can't figure out how they qualify to do what they find financially feasible. And so I always say writing down your intentions so that people know the rules, because everybody's not going to call when they have an idea or a site, right? Everybody's not going to go ahead and spend a bunch of money doing due diligence if they don't think they have a path forward. So I think trying to advertise what you're really willing to do and be clear about it is always important. And the other thing, and I don't quite know where we landed in the conversation, but Peter asked about the intent of exempting the non-affordable units. And, the county has always been very focused on doing mixed income projects. And some of the places that we really need affordable housing have had the schools closed for a very long time. And so it seems that this will only truly be useful and meet the policy goals of the county to have mixed income. You'd have to also exempt the market rate units from the schools test as well to get the desired policy outcomes there. So that's my feedback.
Thank you. Justin.
Hey, I generally agreed with where everyone was taking this discussion. Didn't really have too much to offer, so I think I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going down my line. Ned, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I'll circle back to Ned. Paul, I'm gonna kind of skip over you for now, but I'll come back. Peter, I think you provided a good bit of insight, but I'll circle back with you as well. How about Thomas?
He put something in the chat a little while ago.
Yes, if the object is to incentivize affordable housing, politics must be eliminated. Got it. So I'm hearing administrative review approval process. And then Tim.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the conversation that has been had. I think that you want the luxury of having that range of the 15 to 25%, but on the developer side, you really do need that predictability so that, folks are actually going to engage in a project, because due diligence does cost quite a bit to get things started. So probably need to nail that down, understanding that depending upon whatever that number is, you're gaining something, you're losing another.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing now the one thing, now that we're specifically talking about this column, the affordable housing definition, I'm still not sure if we would want to recommend that this definition would follow the Howard County median income or the MSA, or maybe it could be one or the other depending upon the project.
MSA is just impossible in Howard County. It's just impossible. We're not going to get, the numbers just don't work. I don't see any developer being able to take the MSA rents and making up the numbers work. I think Peter would agree that it's just, it's too hard. Tying us to Baltimore is too hard. We have to use Howard County median.
I agree.
I agree. Okay.
And Kelly, that's one of the main reasons why for the MIG program that you administer, it's the Howard County area median income. Is that right?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. So there's already sort of a precedent of using the Howard County. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund would be tied to Howard County median income, not MSA. MIT, yeah, the majority of this, not LIHTC, but the rest would absolutely be tied to Howard County. income numbers.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing, I'm going to attempt to do a summary, and I think I'm hearing the definition would be the less than 60% for affordable rental, 60 to 120% for affordable purchase. And then we would use the Howard County median income as the kind of basis, right, for those to determine those income brackets. And then in terms of the recommendation, that would be types of projects that could pull from this column or could pull units from this column. That would be any developer could submit a proposal going above and beyond MIHU requirements. And that proposal would go to the Housing and Community Development Board to review. But there needs to be some kind of meaningful affordability component that I heard would be anywhere from 15 to 25%, just to kind of make all of that work. And it would be going through an administrative approval process versus something like a zoning board or a council resolution. And then it just needs to be very clear and predictable, because if it's not, then that sort of defeats the purpose of it being a more streamlined, efficient process.
I think the other piece was how much above 15 or 25%. And I believe it should be at least 20%, puts on a level playing field with the Housing Commission and what we've done in the past of at least 20% of the units to be affordable.
I agree.
So it should be 20 to 25%. Is that what you were?
Well,
at
more
least 20.
than 15 or more than 25, but the 15 should be at least 20. I guess the 25 should be 30. I don't know, but at least 20% of the units to be affordable.
Okay.
So it sounds like it's, for example, if a typical MIHU is 10% or 15%, depending on the zoning, then the incentive units would, a 10% project would have to turn into a 15% project, and a 15% into something like that. Is it 5 percentage points higher?
That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another piece would be look for opportunities to create density bonus. Of course, the projects that qualify for the Housing Expansion Affordability Act, they already have a density bonus as authorized by the state. But for projects that perhaps are not coming in under the HEAA, what kind of density bonus could be offered or established associated with this column?
I would make it equal to the stepped up affordable requirement. So if you come in as a project with 15% MIHU required, and you want to qualify for the school exemption, you have to step up to at least 20% affordable, which means if Kelly's board approves you, you would get an increase in density of 20% as well.
I would think you might want that to be a little better.
Could go with better.
Well, I'm just thinking, outside of light, whatever, just thinking about affordable home ownership or whatever, I guess if it gets them out of waiting for APFO and all that kind of stuff, maybe it's worthwhile. But for a physical, at least from a business case standpoint, having all the additional density being strictly the affordable units, it's not necessarily helping. I mean, it'll financially make the project more difficult to pencil. So the idea would be that, you would perhaps get more affordability if you offered more density than just one for one.
What do you got in mind?
Well,
I don't have all the answers.
I think Montgomery County has a density bonus program. And maybe the recommendation could be, so generally you would need to study the issue, study the local economy, like the local, land prices in Howard County, and have a review of the financial feasibility of what type of density would be necessary to make a project work from a financial feasibility standpoint. So it's almost like you would recommend to study the issue to determine what level the density bonus needs to be to make it work, rather than come up with a certain percentage in this review committee.
Yeah, I mean, every deal could be different, but I do believe it should be better than 1-to-1.
I don't, ordinarily, I would think any study would be a good idea, but we don't need another study. So I think we got.
Well, I know, I understand that too. I mean, the density bonus will be a zoning change anyways, right? So it's not going to happen anytime soon until COP presents it, unless there's a zoning.
That's why I threw 20 out there, just match it 1-to-1, because I didn't want to be greedy, because I could see the zoning board saying, wait a minute, we need to do a study on the land prices. And
Right.
It just seems to have some sort of a balance to it.
Right. And I think that could be a recommendation for the future whenever there is an opportunity to change the zoning regulations. But I think it sounds like we've got some good near-term recommendations that we might be able to act on immediately versus what is more of a midterm to longer term. And my longer term definition is more within a handful of years, not many years. But anyway, it just sounds like we could have some near-term immediate changes that you could recommend to the APFO review committee versus what would then require other zoning regulation changes.
Really pleased to hear you say that, Mary. Thank you.
Oh, trying to break it up into a near term versus
well, focus on the near term, yes.
Right.
I'm just I'm afraid that it's all going to happen when I'm not here.
Well, maybe we could. So I think what our next steps would be is to summarize what we heard, which I know hopefully we've got staff that have been taking extremely copious notes, and this is why we record, to try to summarize what some of these recommendations could look like. And we could break it up into near term versus what is an APFO change and longer term versus what would require a zoning change. If that helps for organization.
Excuse me, I have a question. Paul, where are you going?
No, I'm not getting anywhere any fast, but it just seems like with affordable housing, the goal line just keeps moving. So when Mary is talking about bringing the goal line in some, I responded to that. Like, okay, first time I've heard that in an affordable housing discussion in a long time.
Trying to make recommendations for the near term?
Yeah. Because usually it's affordable, like, let's take a look at that 5 years from now.
Well, from what I'm hearing, there are some these are recommendations that are going to go to the APFO review committee. Maybe this is a good time just to kind of segue into the next slide, Sarah, which are next steps. So we could recommend, like I said, we'll summarize what we heard the recommendations from this group to be. We'll share it with the whole group to get feedback. And I think how we've worked it is if we get consensus from everyone via email, then we're good to go. And then we'll be trying to get that consensus pretty quickly, because ideally we do want to try to take this to the APFO review committee for their March 12th meeting. And we would like to ask for a volunteer from this group who could co-present with DPZ, could co-present these recommendations with DPZ. So March 12th at 6 p.m. and we'll get you the draft recommendations from what we heard from this meeting ASAP, and then give you a deadline for your review and feedback. All so we can be ready by March 12th is the goal.
Good.
And the APFO meeting is in person, but if you need to be virtual, we can make arrangements for that as well.
Thanks, Linda. Is there a volunteer for March 12th at 6 p.m.? More than one could go.
Let me just clarify. The reason we really like someone from this committee is, this is really your effort. Yes, we are helping you kind of formulate your findings and recommendations, but we really want this to come from your working group and not just be a DPZ staff led initiative. We really want this to be your initiative. So this is something you feel strongly about. We want you to recommend that and advocate for it with the AFO group.
Linda, I'll do it. I did it the last time, and this time I feel much more encouraged about it because in this meeting today, we genuinely had a good exchange of opinions and discussion, and I think we came up with something. So I'm happy to talk to the AFO committee about it.
I'm happy to second your nomination, Paul.
Would anyone else like to help Paul out? I think it'd be great if we had another member just come for support. You know, our AFO group is really wonderful. And I mean this with all respect to them. There's a lot of focus on schools, right? We know this. But housing is also a huge need in Howard County. And right now, the schools test and what we need to do to, you know, understandably so, make sure that we continue to have one of the top school systems in the state is of utmost concern. And I don't want to ever pit schools versus housing, but we really need the housing advocates to really just come forward and be there and have that discussion. So I think, again, the more meaningful conversations that these two groups can have with one another to explain where you're coming from and I think Paul's a great resource, but I think if one more person could also step up and have that conversation too with the APFO committee would be extremely helpful to have there at that meeting as well. No pressure, think about it, but I'm just giving you the sales pitch of how I'd like to see if we could have another person from this committee come would just really be great to help move the needle a little bit to really just, you know, show how critically important it is that we are all on the same page. In order to also have our school system move forward, to have all the great things that we need to have with our schools, we also need to have housing built reasonably so within Howard County in order to generate revenue for the county. So it's not just about crowding of schools, but it's also about good planning and incremental development that's also necessary from affordability, from income and revenue generation within Howard County. So all the things that we love and want in the county all comes from the same pot of funds. Also in the chat, I do want to say I did paste in there the link to the memo that we've provided for DPZ and how we are applying the Housing Expansion Affordability Act. That was the governor's housing package, quote unquote, that was passed last year and went into law January 1 of this year, in case you're interested in looking it over.
So I'll second that. I mean, I would be happy to do it, but I'm seen as an advocate and sort of mission. I'm the wrong person. So I would really hope someone else will do it.
Peter. Yeah, and I think the group knows you well, and I think I agree with that. I think it'd be great if we had someone who maybe they don't know as well from that realm. So think about it. You can be there.
And Linda, I just would agree that I'm glad you agree that I'm the wrong person generally.
I didn't mean that to be offensive, Peter. I think you're wonderful to work with, but you know, we all know, right? Like it'd be great to see you know, someone else come forward that is passionate as well, but maybe lesser known, to hear kind of an impassioned plea why housing and affordable housing is really important in Howard County. And how do we get there? You know, if we can't build, like you said, the market rate housing, we can't get affordable housing.
Well, I'd be happy to join Paul on the 26th, but I couldn't do it on the 12th.
And that would be great too. I mean, I think that's fine. And I will say, in some ways, I kind of think the 26th is better strategically. And I'll tell you my thinking on this is that, so I'm running the APFO committee, and what we've asked the APFO committee members to do for the 12th is to give us a list of motions they would like to bring forward. And so this may help them then on the 26th to circle back around. And so if two of you could come on the 26th, that would be amazing. So they will have already laid out where they want to go. And then hearing from members of this committee come forward, they may be able to redirect some of that after they've heard this too as well. So I think that would be fine too. So then I have Ned and Paul. That would be fabulous. I'm penning you, and you're not even penciled in. You're an ink.
If you would like me, if anybody else doesn't want to stand up, and
that would be amazing. And this is what we need to, right? Like with this group, and like I've said to the APFO committee members, it's not just passing the baton, right? It's taking it to the finish line. It's advocating all the way through council adoption of whatever that might be your position. Because this doesn't stop here, right? With this group, it doesn't stop with APFO. It stops with council adoption and seeing it all the way through to the end. So I'm just going to keep giving you my impassioned plea to how we need to get to this next step. Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ned. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
And we will send you information on the next meeting. So that March 26th, I'm putting you down.
Yeah, definitely. I cannot do the 12th. I will be landing in Florida at 6 p.m.
I don't blame you.
Our DPZ team will help put together, of course, the presentation, and we'll meet with you to kind of go through the slides in advance of the 26th. But in advance of all of that, we'll be sending this working group the summary of your recommendations that we'll be presenting to the APFO review committee ASAP to get some consensus.
Who is on the APFO review committee, just out of curiosity?
So there's 15 members, 2 appointed by each council member, 3 appointed by the county executive, and then a Board of Education member and a Howard County Public School member. So the grand list, do you want me to go over who the membership list is? There's probably some familiar names and faces that you may already know. So right. We have Todd Otterburn, John Brown, Aaron Casagrande, Pascal Crosby, Jeffrey Domu, Xavier Essen, Paul Glykoff, Laura Jones, Brent Lovelace, Dan Lubley, Jen Mallow, Lisa Markovitz, Vanessa Patano, Bill Scher, and Antoine Wright. And the chair is Todd Otterburn with Laura Jones, who is vice chair.
Just making sure there's nobody on there that I pissed off somewhere along the way.
I hope not.
I hope not to.
But the group has been really good, really listening to each other's thoughts, concerns, having a really great discussion. Now we're getting into the motions and the voting. So this is where the rubber meets the road.
Gotcha.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? That was our last slide. Any other comments? Feel free to raise your hand or just chime in. If not, I'd like to congratulate everyone for finishing before 5. Yay! 18 minutes early. Sometimes I can do math. Yeah. All right. All right, wonderful. Well, you'll hear from us with a summary certainly by the end, no later than the end of the week, but ideally sooner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you all so much for
everything.